Hi guys, Ron here. As you may know, winter is rapidly approaching here in the Northern Hemisphere, and this is usually the time of the year when you're really forced to ride in wet conditions if you want to keep riding outside. I have a Zwift setup now, but I use that basically on all the weekdays because now that the days are short, by the time I get home, it's dark and I don't really like riding in the dark. So at the weekends, I really like to go outside even when the conditions are not ideal. And for this, I have collected a couple of tips here for you. So let's just get into it. Let's start with the bike first. So usually when it's cold and wet, or basically just the days are getting shorter, you really don't want to be riding outside without a rear light. Now I really like these Infinity LED lights. These are USB rechargeable, so no batteries to mess around with. Really bright, really small. I also like to use the Bontrager Flare, which also has a proprietary mount for the Madone, but I had two of those and unfortunately both broke, and I think that's because of water and grass. So right now I'm using this one, and I really like it. It's very cheap, reliable, no water and grass so far, so yeah, definitely a good one to try out. Now, since you are going to be riding through standing water a couple of times, it's also a very good idea to invest in a little saver, particularly if you have a saddle with a cutout. The more cutout you have, the more glad you're going to be that you have something just to keep your ass from getting wet. Then if you go down to the tires and wheels, now if you have a disc brake road bike, this is a very good opportunity to take it out because that's where it's going to shine. But if you use standard rim brakes like I do, then common advice would be that you should really get a pair of aluminum wheels. Well, in my experience, these more modern high-end carbon wheels with good brake surfaces offer much better braking than just regular aluminum rim in both wet and dry conditions. Now, of course, you might not be able to fit these into a budget, but if you can, then I don't think it should be, you shouldn't. I don't think you shouldn't use these in wet conditions because, they're not made of sugar. They break very well. They're not going to wear that fast unless you ride some mountains and you're braking a lot. So if you don't have to, don't really swap your high-end wheels because, in my opinion, it just doesn't make too much sense. Then tire-wise, my advice is that really shy away from time trial specific, very fast, very low rolling resistance tires because in my experience they are quite slippery in the wet and even a bit in the dry. So if you are using Corsa Speeds or Continental TT tires, then I suggest to swap them out for regular road race tires because these are going to provide much better grip, perhaps even a wider size and at a lower pressure, so you really get that nice contact patch to get the grip on the wet road. Brake pad wise, most rim brands work best when used in conjunction with their proprietary pads, so yeah, stick to that and I think you'll be safe even when braking in the wet. Now, from the wheels I've tried, these MVs are by far the best in terms of brake performance, but some other wheels are quite good as well. For example, my Vision Tri-Spoke, that's pretty decent. Then we got older Zip Firecrest designs without the NSW brake track. they are pretty decent as well, and the NSW wheels are a tiny fraction better, but there's no huge difference in there. So yeah, plenty of good wheels nowadays that are going to stop you even in the wet. Then bike maintenance wise, of course it's going to be harder to keep your bike running in good order, so you're going to need to spend a bit more time servicing it. So the first consideration you should make is, well, I keep saying this, but box chains are just better than any kind of oil-based lubricant, because even if you ride in wet conditions, it doesn't get dirty, the wax doesn't wash off that easily, and your drivetrain remains pretty silent and much more efficient, and of course very clean as well, even in the wet. Then if you talk about bearings, bottom brackets, pulley wheels, some people advise using thicker grease in there. Actually, I don't use thicker grease, I just use more of it. So in the bottom bracket I don't fill the bearing 75% like it's advised, but I fill it 100%, but with the same type of grease. Then if you talk pulley wheels, I replace the oil in there, which is normally in the ceramic speed system. I put some regular bearing grease in there, then it doesn't need that much maintenance. And finally, if you're running Speedplay pedals, it's worth keeping an eye on them in two details. The first is greasing the bearings themselves, so make sure you don't get some wet residual grease in there, so flush it out a bit more often with fresh grease. And from a perspective of cleat lubrication, Speedplay don't really recommend any kind of oil on their pedal systems, but I have found that no matter how much or how often did I use their Teflon spray or Teflon lubricant, it just doesn't work, it's creaking all the time. And now recently I have switched to a very light oil-based lubricant, and the problems have basically gone away, even in the wet. It works very well. It's not as clean, of course, as Teflon, but it's not bad. You just sometimes need to wipe residual oil out from the cleat and from the pedal body. Okay, now I think we have the bike covered. If you are going to take these steps, then you're going to be alright. Then if you talk about gear a bit, so there are many kinds of waterproof clothes out there. Personally, I use the Rapha Shadow Kit, which is, of course, it's not going to keep you completely dry on a 3-hour ride with pouring rain, but it works decent. You don't really get cold in it, and it fits and feels like a race jersey and some race bib shorts, so very good. But actually the biggest concern, I think, when road riding in the wet are the feet and the shoes. So what I've done with quite a lot of success is I modified my shoes a bit. So most shoes have this little vent at the front. I taped it from the outside and from the inside as well. It's a bit more tricky, but can be done. Yeah, I've already mentioned the lubrication of the cleat, so this keeps the water from getting in through your hole, but of course it has ventilation all over it, the shoe I mean, and you can solve that easily by a pair of overshoes, but I have quite a lot of overshoes, and the only ones that actually work and keep the water out reliably are the long velvet toes. So even the rough ones, they're much warmer, much thicker, breathable, etc. But the velvet toes are the only ones I would recommend for riding in wet and rainy conditions. They're not very warm, they're not breathable at all, but they're super waterproof, so if that's your main concern in those conditions, then they're definitely the one to have. And one final tip, perhaps more of a comfort and subjective thing. I really like to put some lotion on my legs when I'm riding on the wet, so that's before I ride, and that keeps the rainwater from my skin, from drying out my skin, sorry. And yeah, that's not that important, but it keeps me a bit more comfortable, I think. So this will be my tips for riding in the wet. If you have any, or if you have any other suggestions, then don't forget to leave them in the comment section down below. It's all for today. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.